Hello, everyone. My name is Danny Le. I am a librarian here at the Santa Clara City Library. Thank you for joining us in this afternoon talk with Janice S. Kim, all the way from New York City. That's from an old commercial. If you remember that, Pace Picante Salsa. But anyways, I'd like to jump it off with her bio. Janet S. Kim is based out of New York City and specializes in finding stories that reflect experiences from unexpected spaces. Her short film, Speak Chinglish, premiered at CamFest in 2016 with other narrative credits, including content for Sesame Street, Amazon Prime, NBC, HBO, and commercial work for companies such as AT&T, Pepsi, Erno Lazo, Chipotle, Petco, and Mandalay Bay. She was instrumental in helping to produce the 2021 Sesame Street special She Has Come Together that brought a star-studded cast of celebrities and guests to celebrate the diversity of the AAPI community, as well as introduce Sesame Street's first Asian American puppet, Ji-young, to the world. She's been a dear friend of mine for many years and has so much more to share in regards to her work and what she represents. So without further ado, let's give her a warm Santa Clara City Library welcome to Janice Kim. Woohoo!
That is the nicest bio anyone's made for me ever.
I cobbled things together, but I made sure you.
I appreciate it. I was like, wow, she sounds so cool. Oh,
it's you. That's who you are. Yes. Remember that. Internalize that. Look in the mirror. That's you. All right. Anyways, and everybody, if you do have questions for Janet as we go along with this interview, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A function below, and we'll try to get to it as well. But before we get started with this interview, Janet, tell me how have you been as of late, during these unsure times, and maybe some ways that you've been practicing self-care for yourself and the people around you.
I have to say it's been pretty heavy. It's hard to ignore, I think. Like, I don't want to jump into too quickly, but I think just the amount of like anti-Asian hate crimes that have been happening in like around the country, and I think in general in New York, and especially as of late, have been weighing, I think, on a lot of folks. I would say, I think there's been a few other things outside of that too, but it's just been very, very heavy. And I think one of the challenges for me has just been to make sure that I make space for myself to do the feelings and like be a person and connect with my friends and family and the people that I love, because like the pandemic really, I feel like the pandemic just isolated everyone. And I think the thing that I keep coming back to in terms of my work and then in terms of just survival is like connection's going to save us, right? And so really like what is it that connects us? Like what is it that's important? Even if it's just like, hey, can I sit there and like be sad with you in a space? Or can I sit there and just like, can we just talk about things that make us feel good? And usually that entails a lot of cat videos, right? Like that's also really I think that's important. But it's I think the older we get, the harder we make room for that self-care. It's not about like, it shouldn't be the end, like it shouldn't be something that we do to like scoop up at the end when stuff gets too hard. It's be something that we're maintaining, and I think that's always going to be the challenge. So I think really it's the connection part. I feel like that's just the common theme in general. Like no matter what I'm going to do, if it's work or if it's like friendship, it's like, how do you connect and what do you connect to? And thinking about that a lot. So
I've been, throughout this time, also as somebody who self-identifies as, Vietnamese American, Asian American in America, I get lucky to work in a place like the library, but I also know that even though this is my sanctuary for this kind of communal building, I break down, and what I'm learning to do is normalize when I do break down, and maybe I cry in the corner, and not hide from that natural emotion when something triggers me,
Yeah.
I have to believe that community will understand why I'm not showing a proper face, right? And that, I'm not feeling great. But
Yeah.
I
But
think,
what's proper, right?
yes,
Like, what's
yes.
supposed to be proper? Like, one of the things that I don't know, like when I turn, I'm not going to say how old I am, but when I turned 35, like it was this weird arbitrary marker for me where I learned, like, because 35 is the year that it's the youngest, it's this very arbitrary age where it's the youngest age you're allowed to be to run for Senate or president, right?
Mhm.
And so, and I don't know why that like stuck in my mind so much, but like that kind of cemented. I was like, oh, we're the adults now. Like, there's all these jokes about millennials being these people that like can't make a doctor's appointment, and we're all like so like we need our fancy coffee and all that, and those things have been debunked a while ago. But I think that like what hit me is like, yeah, it's okay for us to muddle through and like set the tone for what it is moving forward, because the things that we say and the things that we do have an impact and consequence.
Mm,
And so like we can't live in fear of like, oh no, there's going to be some blowback about something, but we should try to do our best and keep going and learn from those mistakes. And like what's proper, right?
right.
Like it's okay to like, I don't know, like I think the older we get, like the less it's okay, it's okay to like fall apart, and it's okay to ask for support and take up space and be supported, you know? It's okay to like center us. And I think, and when I say us, it's like you, us as like individuals, but us as like an Asian American community. I think that's really important. And so it's okay. Like it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that we're creating this space now for one another and
Yeah.
for anybody else out there who might be listening in now or later. But let's talk about that growing up. What was it like for you growing up and, self-identify as a Korean American, but, where did you grow up as well? Um,
Mm.
so we can get a
Um,
sense of who you are.
oh boy. So I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I and like partially in Chicago and then in the suburbs of Chicago. I grew up in, I would say, a majority white suburb. And I think the thing about the Midwest that people forget about is like we're very nice, but I think that there's like a touch of like the passive aggressiveness of the South, but it's like the racism is like very much institutionalized. Um, I think my mom might regret having done this, but she gave me a lot of books that had anything to do with like any other people, like any other non-white folks who
Mm,
are in the world. So I had like a junior biography of Martin Luther King Jr. And then she would also find every single young adult book that was written by a Korean American author, and just like all, and she didn't really read them herself. She just knew it was important. And so I think I don't think she realizes like she like planted that seed, and then I would feel very angry about a lot of things that I was seeing and doing. And when you're younger, using words like prejudice,
mm,
like, or that's racist, like, you know that gif where the little guy, the little boy is like, that's racist, like I
yeah.
would say things like that. And probably I might have been right, and there are definitely some very like traumatic events growing up. But looking back, I was like, oh, I don't know if I knew what I was saying. Um, so I think there's just a lot of like anger and frustration from very young age, and I think it wasn't until I was like in my teens that I had a better language around it. And but yeah, it was very like learning what your racialized self was is it was very like it was not something that you couldn't help but be aware of it and not understand why people saw you that way,
Right.
if that makes sense.
I
Yeah.
think it does. I have a similar kind of upbringing. Being born in
Mm.
Oklahoma, and
Oh yeah, I
but
forgot
I
about that.
wasn't. Yeah, I mean that was a little bit more different, but I didn't have that kind of self-actualizing moment. I didn't have parents who bought me books and maybe later regretted it. I
Yeah, yeah,
definitely had to covertly read this kind of stuff or figure it out when I
Yeah.
moved to California. But for yourself, while you were, growing into your, and the identity that you're discovering, exploring, what were some of the ambitions, and dreams that you had growing up? And I mean, it might be obvious, but what were they reflections of your family's ambitions for you, or were they, kind of like inklings of what you are doing now? Especially
Oh
in that time.
man.
I mean, it's hard to say when you're young, but
Yeah, 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 yeah.
plant the seeds, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was always going to be writing no matter what. I think that's how you and I met too, because we were both writing poetry and I was very bad at it, and I think you were very good at it. but but I think that like whether or not my mom intended, I think that started me doing things very covertly myself, which is just writing secretly, reading plays secretly, doing a lot of things secretly. And it was like nerdy things, like, it was like, it wasn't like, ooh, I'm going to a party. It's like, ooh, I'm going to stay up all night reading this book. Like, it was that kind of thing. Um, and so I would say, like, there's a point where I actually had to stop telling them what I wanted to do very early because, I think for people of our parents' generation, a lot of times there's this like, if you're a child of an immigrant, there's a sense of prescriptiveness that comes into play when it comes to raising your kids, right? And so, and I think there's a very, it's completely understandable, but at the same time, it doesn't really leave a lot of room for creativity.
Mhm.
And so I remember just like like there are a lot of secret things that I did for a very, very long time well into adulthood. And I think, like it's really interesting because like looking back, if like I was to talk to like younger me who was doing secret writing and secret reading, she'd be kind of shocked to know that it like this became a career path, much less something that I do for love and for a living.
Mhm.
Um, uh, yeah, but I would say like my parents wouldn't, my family of origin probably would have a hard time understanding what I do because it doesn't fit into a mold of what it means to like be successful. And that's okay, like still paying my rent. So
Right, and I'm grateful that, I think for many of our generation and the new generation, we're the paradigm of the definitions that we are supposed to fit into are no longer fitting.
mhm,
They're breaking at the
yeah,
seams, and I like it. So, but I'm sorry, parents
yeah.
out there. We're just telling you straight up.
Sorry, parents.
Secret reading and secret writing. That's what we're doing.
Like, oh no, I stayed at a theater party too long where we were singing Rent. Like, that was my rebellion.
For some people that they're not going to be worried about that, which is probably a good thing, but it's all right. That was you, in your
Yeah.
Korean American family. Like with your work, especially around storytelling and narration,
Mm.
um, as you continue to start writing, what drove you more to talk about and write? Was it more stories that revolved in your life, or maybe about your community, whether it be your American community, your Korean American community, Asian
Mm.
American community, or was
Mm.
it stories that you felt like needing amplifying and uplifting? Because the fact that you work in this industry, which is very, much out into the public in creating content,
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't often see a lot of our stories amplified. Not until recently, so much more that there's an angle for selling the stories. But
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
what drove you into this realm of work?
Yeah. I mean, I think initially it was, I don't think I could name it. I just knew that I couldn't not do it,
Mm,
and I think I think it's a little bit of everything you touched on. I think it was like part of it was just amplifying things. And then part of it was like anger about just the fact that we exist and that we're human. Cause a lot of times, like as Asian Americans, you're just like begging to be considered as like a whole person. Like
Mhm.
we have thoughts and feelings too. It shouldn't just be these tropes that we see played out in media. But I think that in the last few years, the thing that's really driven me, and I keep coming back to this, is connection, right? Like what is connecting, what on the baseline connects me to this story. And it's not just because some kid looks like me or some, you know, like some kid looks like me or we cried about the same stuff. It's like really like what in my heart. And that sounds really woo woo, but you know, we're people, right? We're all humans. There are people who make the stories and there are people who comprise who we're talking about, and then there are people we're trying to reach. And the place where you fit in is as like someone who makes stuff or someone who tells a story, is that you too are a human. Like a lot of times the writer usually views themselves as this like person that's like outside of it, and I'm a god making this world. And I think there's a part element of that, but at the end of the day, like for me, it's like, how do I connect to it? You know, because I'm one body. And I think if it connects to me and I keep that authentic, then like it will definitely connect with other people in some way. But it's not necessarily, I try to keep it very, very simple because, um, yes, the community element is really important. Yes, the visibility is important. Yes, I think, you know, representation definitely matters, absolutely matters. But why do I connect to those things? What is it beneath all of that? Like the humanity between all of that? Like, how do I, you know, because at you and me, probably as Asian Americans, we probably don't connect to the exact same Asian American stories ourselves, just even between the two of us. And I think that variety is really, really important because there's a breadth, right? That there's like a real diaspora. And so like I don't have control over what people like respond to. And I definitely don't have control over like, you know, how the world works. But what I do understand and what I do know how to do is like at least pay attention for me to what I connect to, and then like use my skill set, you know, as someone who like what I like to tell people I do for a living is I tell people what to do in front of and around cameras, you know? And so it's like it covers everything, right? Like as a producer, you're putting all the pieces and like setting up an ecosystem to like to thrive and like tell this story. As a director, it's like, okay, I'm captaining this vision and like bringing everyone to like steer the ship to make the ship work. And like as a writer, you're giving them the ship. So, and like if I'm taking pictures, it's like a completely different thing. But at the end of the day, like if none of those people have a connection to whatever it is, or at least like as me, if I don't, then like it doesn't matter, right? It can be anything from like it can be a mustard commercial, or it can be something like Jiyoung, or it can be the next novel. But if I don't connect to that as the maker, as the person who's helping drive whatever vision is happening, then it's like it doesn't matter, right? Um, so I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Did I
it
answer the
does.
question?
Yeah, you're like, did it answer? Yes, yes. You
Did I
know,
answer the question?
I mean, because which leads into what I asked, that, you know, the fact that you wear so many different roles and hats while on a production, you know, um, and maybe you wear all of them at once, you know, because, you
No,
know,
I don't
it's,
anymore.
you don't, all right, that's good. But
No,
at
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
time that you were wearing all of them, or you had to kind of learn as you go, you know,
yeah.
what were some of those, you know, situations where it called for you, you know, especially I have to be cognizant of your identity as a Asian American woman in this industry, you know, that
Yeah.
had forced you to wear these many hats, you know. So what were those obstacles like that kind of, you know, put you in that position where it wasn't always a straight and even road to, you know, your own personal success, but you're like, look,
Mhm.
you're not getting me those opportunities, fine, I'm just going to take them myself. um
Yeah, yeah.
which probably made you
I
more
mean,
stronger now, you know.
I mean, I would say I don't think the road is still straight, you know? I think part of what I've learned in the last like 20 so years, oh my God, 20 years,
I tricked
20
you.
years. So
Say it.
I know, oh my God. But like, is that like it's not straight. And I think if there's so many different ways in entertainment to tell a story. I would say because I didn't go to film school.
Mm.
Because again, secret, like that's part of the secret stuff, right? But I did all the things wrong for my first film. Like I made a short film that no one ever will see. It was about superheroes, but I did everything wrong, meaning I had animals, I had babies, I had special effects, I had a gun at one point, and I had to reshoot it, I think once, and that money was all from my pocket.
Mm.
The first time I raised money, and the second time I took all the money from my own pocket. And I think that first film, doing that all by myself, that taught me more on the job than I ever could have probably in film. I mean, film school is great. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but it's always kind of been like that. And just being able to be open to knowing that I don't know everything. And like the beautiful thing about a film set or any set is that it's really transparent why everyone's there. Like from the person who like gets you your coffee, which by the way is really important because I used to do that job, and like to the person who's like making sure that there's eyeballs on the thing when this thing is done. And it's really like it it's I don't know, like I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to just like not have an ego about it, and like whatever position you're doing, you can pick stuff up and just learn and listen by just again connecting with other people on set. And I think that's really important. And I don't think that for me the path doesn't feel very straightforward. Like I still do many things, but now I'm just smarter. Like now I'm thankfully, knock on wood, at a place where I don't have to do all the things to create my own opportunities. But it's only helped serve me in like strengthening all the different things that I do when I have that I do that I do for a living.
We get it.
Because yeah, I know, I'm still 5. I work for children's TV. Come on. But like even in like even within a tentpole show or a tentpole like Sesame Street or a tentpole client like Verizon, like as someone who like creates the content for folks, you're usually not there's it's every person who's in this position will probably have like a different bouquet. Like if you're smart, you should have a bouquet of skill sets that you can do. So I would say it's gotten a lot less like fraught, but it's definitely not straightforward. Like I never thought I would end up doing what I did a year ago, and every time I think about a year ago today or 2 years ago today, I'm like, oh my God, that's really cool. I got to do that. That makes sense.
Yeah, but with that, 'cause you've been in this work for so long, but you feel like you still face that some of the tropes that, especially in most industries, the misogyny. And if it wasn't because of the work and your resume, would you have gotten the same kind of respect? And I'm sure that there's certain situations that there's always somebody who's gonna try to read you and who you are. Like, why is she here?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's never not going to happen. It's like we were joking that we both look 19 before we started recording, and I think at this point I think I have to just lean into it and relish it, because I'm not gonna what am I gonna do, age myself?
Yeah.
Like heck no. like nope.
There's an app for that. There's an app for that. So,
there's an app for that. I used to lie about my age and say I was like 5 years older just to like really mess with people. But I think, and a lot of people of color, we joke about how we look younger for longer so we can have just the same amount of opportunities that like white people do. But I think, but yeah, I think it's always going to happen. And it's a gauntlet, and it's really, really hard. And I think it's one of the lessons that you're going to learn, and it's not right. So the other thing that's changed in the last like few years is that like now I'm in a position of power to be like, say something like, oh, I'm in charge of the makeup of my crew. Like I need my stories. If like we're telling this story in front of camera, I need it to reflect behind the lens no matter what. And there's this, for a while when I was working in commercials, there's this point where like you'd see another woman of color on set and you'd be like, you, we're best friends now. And it's because there's so few of us. And I think especially if you're like Korean American or Asian American, that definitely played into it. But it doesn't necessarily mean like, so there's like that kind of solidarity and like connection and strength that's been super important. And that's also saved my brain and my heart too, working here. But yeah, I don't know. It's like I feel like I'm constantly sniffing for connection and what I connect to, and that can change. But that keeps saving me every single time, no matter what. Even if something's been hard, even if there's been a shoot or like a project that's like completely taken a lot out of me, like I know that certain things that I've gained, relationships that I've gained, have saved my heart
Mm.
to keep to stay, because then you can work with them again, and that's really great. Like you can slowly start to build your own ecosystem and your own place with
I
other
think,
people.
yeah,
Yeah.
building trust, a community, people of a like mind and heart, and vision,
Mm,
keeps us staying in the madness. I think,
yeah.
Um, but it's I'm grateful that you're continuing and making that kind of difference with others who might be also feeling unsure about themselves in this industry. So you having been through it already and still growing with it, we're grateful that you are there, because
Ah,
we need people to know that it's okay to be a part
uh,
of this, but also to give them the realness of how hard it is, so.
yeah. It's not easy. I mean, there's a reason why people go to grad schools, because then you do have an automatic like cohort of people that you can trust and work with. And I think that's valuable too. But yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy.
Well, you make it look easy. So either that or you're
Ah.
smart. All right. So, I'm curious, I'm as much as most people, but how did you end up being a producer for for the world famous Sesame Street? Trust me, when you told me one day, I was like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? No way. Are you for real?
I know. It was weird. It was like I only it was I think it was like kind of dumb luck. So I happened to be working with a production company that would do some stuff with Sesame Street from time to time. And then I worked on like season 47's, like they do a special every year. So I worked on their season 47 special called Get That Wand, where like Abby, there's a character named Abby Kadabi, and her wand gets stolen by a bird who turns into a person or something. And they run around all of New York, you know,
Wow.
turning kids into elephants and all that. It's adorable. It's really great. But then the company ended up doing other segments with them on every now and then. And through all those shoots, I got to know the Sesame Street people, because I would say the one thing about them is they are just as nice as you think they would be, like
Mhm.
working on that show. Um, and I think it was literally a happenstance moment where I was like, hey, I think one year I had like one year, like the end of one year was bad. And then the first job I did the following year was with Sesame Street. So I just wrote the producers and I was like, hey, it was really nice to see you. Thank you for letting me, like, it was nice to see you guys. And they were like, we might have a job for you. And I was like, huh. And I ended up, they ended up bringing me back to produce the season 50 segment called Big Bird's Road Trip. So Big Bird's Road Trip I ended up taking Big Bird across the country to 10 cities, and we
Wow.
interviewed a bunch of kids about why they like living where they live. And the thing that really actually made me take the job was one of the senior producers was like, I was like, so I just want to let you know, like, I really want the cruise to reflect the country and the cruise to reflect this show, number one. And number two, like, how are we casting the children? And the thing that made me take the job was they're like, yes, do it. Go hire whomsoever you need, say what you need to. And of course, I ran everything by them before I said it. But then the second thing was their senior producer was like, I don't want to see a bunch of white kids cast in this, because that's not a reflection. And like hearing that from a white woman was like, oh, good, I don't have to fight that battle.
Mhm.
And it was really great. And I think they've brought me back often. And I don't take that lightly at all because they're wonderful. And um, I think one of my MO, like one of the things that keeps happening with me is like anytime there's like a weird set of circumstances, I usually get called, whether it's from Sesame Street or like a commercial client, like, oh, we have 1,000 puppies in the world, or like, oh, we got to take an 8 foot, like too tall, like gigantic neon bird out into the world because they don't normally bring the puppets out into the world that much, especially Big Bird, because he's kind of, it's a big costume. He's very expensive. And yeah. And so it's just, and then the rest is history, I guess. Like that's just kind of, and I would say with Jiyoung and the special, the Asian hate crimes had been going up, and Sesame Street had implemented this racial justice initiative that was super important. But because a lot of it was a reaction to things that was happening, like everyone was just catching up with themselves. And a few of us started asking questions about, okay, but you know, I'm the only, like, and it was really poignant for me because at the time I was the only, and I think I still am the only Asian producer who works for them.
Mm.
And so there, there was like a point where I was going, they were doing a lot of remote shoots in their small green screen studio at the offices. And I was, I think, one of the very few people of color, and I think the only Asian producer who was like running in and out of, literally physically in and out when everyone was stuck at home. I was on site.
Mhm.
And a few of the elder murders took place like 10, 20 blocks away from the office. And there was a point where I was like, okay, I just need to start asking some questions. And thankfully, some of the other producers of color who are also amazing were like, absolutely, we're going to include you in these conversations. They're very gracious about it. And I think the whole Jiyoung process got accelerated because they had been talking about making more humanoid puppets of characters of color. But it was very, very fast. And I'm very proud of that work, but it was something that I think we call it the Asian Brain Trust, where Alan Murata, who plays Alan on the show, he directed it, right?
So dope.
Shout out to Alan, right? And then Kathy Kim, who's the Korean American puppeteer, and then Liz Hara, who's like, she's Hapa, she's Japanese American, and she wrote the script. And so, you know, because the four of us are very close, we're friends, and we all were working on it together, we just made sure to support each other and make sure that like it was authentically something that was a real kid, that felt like a real kid, you know? So yeah, I think that was, yeah, it was, I don't know if it was, it was a lot of hard, there were a lot of hard conversations that I think needed to happen before, but I'm glad that we took that opportunity to make sure that like it was done the way that it should have been done. So.
And I know I've talked to you about this when I rewatched that episode before, you know, our talk.
Oh, you did?
And, you know, I told you, you know, like, well, I was on my elliptical, so I was, you know, working out. I was like, all right, I watched it. Yeah, I was just, you know, moving about. But I, you know, when I watched it and hearing, you know, the character, especially Jiyoung, how she felt about how people told her to go home, you know, like I went, you know, I went through that too. And I started crying because, you know, as much as people, if they don't see themselves in these characters and don't see the worth of that kind of representation, just know that there's other people who do. And I'm a you know 40-plus-year-old adult. I'm crying like crazy on my. I had to pause. I was like, you know what? Because it's hard to answer to that when you get confronted about not being wanted. I still have this turn my heart, but to know that in this opportunity to speak on it openly in a very in children's television, right? It makes me feel so good, especially with the star-studded, you know, cast you got assembled. I don't know how y'all got, you know, Jim.
Oh, I pushed for Simu so hard. It's like, Simu, we need him.
You probably blurted it out without thinking. Yeah, what did I say? I didn't cough. It sounded like, what did it sound like? Simu Liu? Yeah, that's why I meant.
Zoom tight.
You're Zoom tight, but we got to get him. Anderson Paak, I think, and
Yeah, Anderson was there.
every moment was just, a figure in, more or less the contemporary Asian American or global Asian, celebrity field that have changed the world, in one way or another, whether it's in sports, in acting, or in, comic books. It was just in cooking, right? It was like,
Mm,
wow, this just makes me feel so good. And the song that, also accompanied that great episode,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, looking at uh, for this special that, occurred, moving I guess for Sesame Street or even children's programming in the future, how else are we gonna see, that change reflected? Will it be more puppets or would it be more storytelling? I know for the history of Sesame Street, regardless of how people want to change the narrative or the origin story, it's always about talking about the people, children from the
Yeah, yeah.
street, about equity and that education. And the great equalizer was television at the time when everybody had a TV. Now it's social media. Now it's having, the internet access. But, not everybody has that kind of equity and access. So,
Mm,
what new initiatives do you think, at least for Sesame Street, but even for educational media, whether it's documentary storytelling, how
mm,
else can we, as a society, help storytellers like yourself and platforms like Sesame Street tell these stories when people either don't agree with those stories and narratives, or they can't see them themselves.
yeah,
Here as a library, we try to make that equitable. Internet's
yeah,
free,
yeah, yeah,
computers,
yeah.
all that. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard, right? Because we're talking about like different things. I think there's a few different entities involved. I think in terms of like, because I can't speak for Sesame Street as an
Yeah.
organization, but what I can say is that for an institution like that, because they're 53 years old, they're shooting season 53 right now. As an institution, it's really on them to really make sure that they find out, and the onus is for them to make sure that they're continually doing the work and having the hard conversations and putting money where their mouth is in terms of developing those stories that connect with kids the right way. They are doing that work. I think that's primarily the thing that saved them and kept them pretty consistent for 50 plus years. There's a whole department about curriculum, and then there's another department for research. And it's not, I would say that they lean very, very heavily into how children are learning, what is affecting how kids learn, what's really important for how children, what's changing for kids these days, how to talk about it. And I think they're doing the work, and it's not perfect, obviously, because again, institutions, so there's a lot of institutionalized issues, but at the same time, the drive is there, the history is there, and they are always, I have to say, they know what they don't know. So they're always going to try and keep learning, because what you don't know is going to continually change, either as an individual or an institution. And I give them so much credit for that because it's so important. And, um, I would say they heard the brain trust when we spoke up, and they just put in a new showrunner, Sal Perez. He's the first like Latinx showrunner of like the show's history, and he's wonderful. Um, and there's like a few other folks that work there now who really understand what it means for kids to like what kids hold on to, how kids pick things up, because a lot of these things like racism, it's scary how early you realize kids pick this stuff up on, because like if you talk to any person of color, there's always some traumatic event that happened to them as a young child usually, and that always ties back to it. And I think that that's what was so poignant about Ji Young and like that moment, is because we all kind of went through it. And I remember when we were in meetings and like everyone's so shocked and appalled. And for us, we're like, yeah, this happens, but this happens, and we need to just address that it happens and just make it the event, not make it about the kid that said it, not make, we have to center the impact that it has on this child, right? Because it has impacted all of us for better, for worse, into adulthood, and it stays with us.
Mhm.
And so, I think that's the reason why we had the caliber of celebrity talent that we did, because everyone's like, oh shit, yes, of course, oh my God. And
Mhm.
a lot of that work was done in the development of Ji Young's character and making sure that like the responsibility of making sure she was a real kid, and really taking what Liz put into place as her character seriously, really taking, because Kathy has a daughter, right, who's around that age, the puppeteer. And so, and just really taking our real lived experiences and making sure that those things were authentic to this child that we're making, like that those things were heard. So I would say, if it's an institution, that's on them. They have all the power, that's all the connections. Really, it's on them to do that work. I would say, for as storyteller, it's, again, onus is on us to make sure that we're always know and we always are open to learning and being uncomfortable and figuring out, our perspective is not the end all be all. Maybe you're not the person to tell that story. Maybe
Mhm.
you're the person to help elevate another person to help tell that story.
Mhm.
um there's not a shortage of things to talk about in this world and things for people to connect to, and I think everyone thinks that there's just a finite amount of stuff, but there's not. And even the same things can be told in different ways, right? So I think it's not about how the public can support us, but how we can support each other as a community, and what does that look like? I don't, and again, community building also happens in different ways, but I want to make sure that through my work, I feel like people feel seen and supported. And I don't start that way, but I just start with what I know, what I feel resonates with me, and then I go from there. Because I'm still surprised. I didn't hit me the impact of what Ji Young had until I started seeing children cosplaying as her.
Mhm.
Because and moms messaging us and telling us about how their daughter, it just didn't occur to me, because I'm realizing now as I talk about it, I didn't have that. And so there's a moment where I just sat in, I took a trip and I sat in the car and I cried for 15 minutes, because I just got all of these images and fan art, and I was like, oh my God. like, um, and so I think it's really, I think I would say, you know, it's if there's a story that you love and that resonates with you, you support it, and then vice versa. The creator also, it goes both ways, and I think that's so important. I see a question, but I don't know
Yeah.
how to do
Um,
it.
well, it seems like it's a question or it's a comment, but Azurgal, sorry if I'm saying it wrong. You're saying you're from Mongolia. Children, adults, and youth in most Western countries use my ethnicity, Mongol, as an insult to call
Mm,
someone stupid or idiot. Mongolian children in French-speaking Canada or France get bullied in school and playgrounds. Dutch schools
mm,
teach kids to call someone with Down syndrome a Mongol. And of course, would the Sesame Street or you personally be interested in working with the Mongolian community to re-educate the world? Even in Disney and Universal Studio cartoons, Oscar-winning movies, and famous comedians freely use the slur. In 2022, Mongoloid. The Asian race is being associated with the word idiot or Down syndrome in medical, educational, entertainment sectors and dictionaries around the world. Um, all right, and yeah, I'm sure Janet would love to connect. And on what I love about what you said, and also what you said, Janet, is that as people, we have to change the narrative. We have to change the
yeah,
storytelling that's been long overdue. And I'll even admit, my my in my knowledge of Mongolia is, has been kind of distilled into some conquering warlord. What I
mm,
learned when I watched friends visit, the country, it's so much beautiful. Even though for what I know, is a nomadic tribe of people. They have their own autonomy. They have their own beauty and language and customs. And I think it's important for storytellers, for me, and as a person as well, is to explore further and change
mhm,
and be challenged to know that
Yeah.
there's more to that word in a dangerous way when it's used in to make fun of others. Um,
Yeah. I mean, it just like I'm trying not to get mad for the fact that it's still being like being used, because it's such a basic thing for it's just such a basic, it's so basic to not use. Like I feel like with like white supremacy, a lot of times when you're just like, don't use like this defiance, it's like, well, I'm gonna, and it's like, well, really, is it really like a million other words to use? So I think, sorry, it just makes me really angry. But I think I think bringing that challenge is important, and I think that being able to say that is important, and I think fighting for it is the hill to die on, right? Because
Mhm.
that's part of it. And yeah, I can't say to whether, again, I can't speak for Sesame, you know, specifically addressing that, but I can say that for me and for other folks who are producers of color, they like that is a serious thing that people do take seriously. And I think it's important to take it seriously. And if it's not, then that's, again, a problem that we will have to deal with and will deal with. There's
Yeah.
there's no cute answer for it except for like it's wrong and it shouldn't be happening. There is a moment, I think, that like I'm tired of this excuse of like unawareness.
Hmm.
Like, oh,
Hmm.
we didn't know. Oh, we have to educate you. Oh, what's a comfort woman? That which was said to me once. And it's like, I'm so glad you don't have the luxury. You have the luxury of not knowing what that is. But as an adult who's had to deal, and a lot of us who are people of color who've had to deal with institutionalized racism and white supremacy for a really long time, from far too young into adulthood, and then seeing people in power who are empowered by the structure and the institutions, like, say, well, they didn't know, they didn't have to know, that's not their experience. Well, you know me, and some of us, and so therefore you have no excuse. And I don't have the energy or the crayons to bring you up to speed, but what I can do, like, you have the Googles, there are many scholars who are much better teachers than I am, you can look up and read about, and there's a very helpful link that was provided for us, and it's like, it's not hard to educate yourself in that way. And I think I yeah, all I can say is that makes me mad, and I'll probably still be mad about it for a very long time, and I'll continue to do something about it. So I can speak for myself and say that I'm not going to let that slide. Um, but I understand that frustration. I definitely understand why it's going to come up, and especially terms like that. And I think it's a good thing that I'm appreciating the question and just
Hmm.
providing a very helpful link. I think that's more generous than I think anyone can be about it. Like, I think that's, yeah.
I mean, this is, I think, the beauty of what you do, and for many of us who are moved to that kind of community and creative work that answers these tough questions, or
Yeah.
finally confronts these issues, because we're tired of it continuing to happen. You
Yeah.
get to a personal breaking point where you're like, I gotta make this stop because nobody else is gonna do it, for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's one noble thing about us getting angry and pursuing our answers in this work, is that other people will get to see it, and
Hmm.
also be moved in their own ways.
Yeah.
um Now, as we're getting to the end of this interview, like, what does the future look like for you? And what have you been working on, some things that you could talk about, briefly, I
Yeah.
guess. I don't know. I'm sure you got a book length, explanation.
I mean, there's a lot, and there's a lot I'm doing right now. I would say, right now I'm directing a documentary about Asian American, like your emotional journey for finding your identity. So there's this amazing national like Asian American like support group that came together during the pandemic, and they all were talking about what it means to be Asian American and doing racial healing work now. And I think that one of the narratives that I feel like is missing in just public eye is how we feel. Like, what does that emotional journey look like? Because a lot of times it's when we look at the news, there's like a lot of trauma, right? It's sensationalist, and it should be because it's the news and we should know what's happening. But what we don't see, is like, as an adult, what does it look like to go on this racial healing journey? Because like the model minority trope just like tricks you into gaslighting yourself, right? And not taking up space and being very quiet in different ways in more than one. And you wrestle with this like imposter syndrome that's really difficult. And so there are 5 folks from the group who volunteered to like be interviewed, and just literally I want to center each person as a person, because there are a lot of similar things that they all have gone through, but every human is so different and everyone's in a different place in their journey, which is super fascinating. And just like, how do you, it's not, it's not this like trauma based, there is trauma addressed, but I don't want to center the trauma. I want to center the person. And I think for me, that's the most important thing about this talk, and why I keep coming back to it. So that's one thing. And then there's this portrait series that I've been working on that, yeah, and a couple other things. There's a lot of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of things.
There's a lot.
The things, the many things.
The many things. But no, there's this portrait series that I've been working on about like just gender fluid trans identity amongst people of color, and what does it mean to step into your power as someone who doesn't, again, see a place in the world for themselves, but like, what does it look like to, you have to take up your own space, you have to build your own, you have to take up, you have to step into your own power. What does that look like? And there's a project that I've been developing around that for the last couple of years, so I think I'm going to shoot it finally, which I'm really excited about. But
we're looking forward to all the things you have here,
yes, many things.
And just for those who are watching and also going to be watching later, especially if they're interested in breaking into all aspects of this industry, what can you leave any tips? Not it's hard to say tips, but things that you learned to persevere through the early years, and maybe also to be aware of what they need to create in order to sustain themselves in this work.
Yeah, I feel like it's it's the same stuff that everyone says. I would say the most important thing is to keep going, but I think in to balance that, it's the stuff that you're going to make to start is going to suck, and that's okay. Like, it's going to suck, it's going to be terrible, but it's okay, because everything, you're not going to be perfect right out the gate. And I think that there's so many lessons to learn in messing up. And the third thing to balance is just knowing like it can't be about your ego. It has to be about what connects you and what's important to you. And you have to kind of know yourself really well to like move forward with whatever things you decide to connect to, and what stories you decide to tell, or what projects you decide to make. And it doesn't matter if it, again, is like a commercial for chocolate versus some like prestige like docu-series about the first bricklayer who was Vietnamese in New Orleans. Like it doesn't really matter, as long as there's something about it that you connect with that is important to you. And it doesn't have to make you cry, and it doesn't have to make you it doesn't have to be the most world ending, big, huge thing, but it just, what about it connects you to it? And as long as you know what that is, it's okay. And it doesn't have to be an esoteric thing. Sometimes it's just like a feeling. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes, but it can't be about your ego, and a lot of times the mistake a lot of us make, and including me, and I struggle with this, is like, in the industry, your ego has to protect you because there's so much. There's no one way to get around it. It's very fraught, and there's a lot of institutionalized issues that happen within the industry. So, keep that in mind. But it's about balance. And, I don't, there's no, like, I don't have a cute way of saying like the advice, but yeah, I think, start with knowing yourself and knowing what you want and knowing what's important to you. And I think go from there. Yeah.
I think those are wise words, not only for this industry, but for, knowing yourself, and where you might fit in, or
Yeah.
be the most impactful. However you see your life, knowing yourself is very important. I think,
Yeah.
Janet, you do definitely know yourself, and very well, I might add. So we're just we're just grateful that you're able to take this time in your busy schedule to talk to us here at the Santa Clara City Library. And also, how else would people be able to find you or see your work, or know what's going on in your world?
I would say, so right now my Instagram is it's just a live portfolio of the things that I have. Sometimes there's like test shoots for ideas that I work on there. But I would say, so I am finally retooling my website, and you can go to that at janetskim.com. But my Instagram is probably the place where I put up the most visual stuff on a rotating basis. That's also Janet S. Kim on Instagram. Yeah, those are the two places you can probably find me pretty quickly. I'm not the greatest at interacting with folks, so they just kind of leave stuff. But yeah, if you want to know what I'm working on and reach me, that's how you get to me. So
Awesome. I'll find a way. I'll text you. That's how. I'm gonna
I don't know. I think that, like, for me, it's not about like me as a person. It's about like, what do I want to put out in the world, And I think that, like, I don't know, it keeps you flexible. Like, so I don't know. It's weird. It's really weird. Danny, usually I'm the one who's doing what you're doing. And so I'm just like, this is such a new experience for
Well,
me
you know
right
what?
now.
It's sometimes you just got to go through that first experience to know how it feels,
Yeah.
and just know that we understand, and I think we all can take from this is what we want to project in the world in any kind of platform and medium is we want to project not just the best, but also protect what we wish to share. I think we've gone to a point where we overshare in this society, and we forget that not everything needs to be shared, but also, if we want true for relationship building, we'll know when and where to do so with
Yeah.
intention. you know
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm
I
grateful
agree.
I made friends with you long ago
When we were 19.
when we were 19.
I don't know. We still look the same. Like, my
I,
favorite photo is there's this favorite photo of you and me from Summit when your hair was like this.
yes, I had the Asian afro.
You had the Asian afro, and then and I was like, oh, I look at that like photo often because I'm like, oh, I remember those kids. Yeah,
they're, they're so good.
you're such nice kids doing nice things.
Well, Janet, thank you so much for talking with me. I hope you continue to be, creating content and art that, resonates with the world. I know you will, but whatever you need, let me know, let the library know. We got your back.
I will. Thank you.
And everybody, thank you for tuning in. If you're not tuning in now, tuning in later. And also just remember to support your library and your community and yourselves. Mental health and physical health is wealth, and we want to see you again in our space. So till then, enjoy your afternoon, evening, wherever you're at, and we'll see you soon. Peace.
Bye.
Bye.